Let's get you set up with your 3D printer and gcode2dplotterart so you can start making art like this. So first we're going to jump into hardware. You're going to need an adapter to attach your pens to your 3D printer. You can find some of these on thingiverse.com or looking elsewhere on Google, or you might have to design your own, as I've done here. And this is a part that I designed after a few iterations and mounted to my 3D printer with some zip ties. And that is how a pen will slide in. I've made two different kinds of adapters for two different kinds of markers that I have, just with kind of different diameters, and they clamp on kind of via pressure to the pens. For these ones, I've also used binder clips to get some extra tightness. And so I've added the binder clip and removed the metal bits. Thing of note here is as you're designing these, make sure it doesn't clamp too tightly or else you might crack the casing for your pen, which I did with this blue one here. Next up, you're going to need a ruler like this, and this is going to, it steps up in millimeter increments, and that's used to figure out some measurements that we'll get to later, as you can see here in the photo. Lastly, you'll need just some ruler and some kind of, well, really, this is up to you, but a way to cut the paper so it fits on your 3D printer bed, and binder clips to attach the paper. We're going to switch over to Cura. And instead of UGS, which is what I recommend throughout the rest of the website, we're using Cura because my computer, for whatever reason, will not connect via UGS over USB to my printer. So today we are using Cura, but it's very similar in what it can do. So first what we'll do is we will attach the paper, and we're just going to go ahead and move the Z out of the way a little bit. And my paper will fit on there. And I'm going to use some binder clips to keep it flat on the surface. And that keeps it pretty close, so we shouldn't have the pen dragging where the paper bumps up. All right, so next we're going to slide in the pen and make sure it is very high up, so it's floating way above the bottom of the printer head, so there's a large gap here. And we'll go ahead and home in the X and Y directions. Okay, and let's bring back the Z a little bit down. All right, so starting in the X direction, we can see that the pen is already over the paper. And so we'll see if we can go a smaller increment to the left, but it looks like the pen does not want to move. So we'll say that our X min is already at X equals 0, and the Y is actually not over the paper yet. So we'll want to go ahead and move this forward a bit. And so that was 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And if we bring this down just to see, we can see that it's now over the paper. So that was about 50. It's the Y min. And now let's set the X min and X max. And if I go ahead and slide over in the X, we'll start with 100. So that's 100. And we'll drop down 110, 120, 130, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. We'll do 180. And then we're going to do the same for going back in the Y. We'll just move over the X a little bit. And we're going to go back 100 first. 100. 200. And that's it. It won't go anymore. So 200 plus our min will give us 250. Next up, we're going to use the ruler here. Actually, we haven't zeroed out the Z, so let's do that first. Z is zeroed out, so we'll move the X over a little bit. So we know that Z is at 0. And that will be our plotting height. And now what we want to do is set this. So we're going to bring it down, and I want the plotting height to be about 3. So if we bring it down here, just until it touches. So there it makes contact at 3 millimeters. So that'll be our travel height. And this is kind of up to you to decide, but I found that if your paper is really wavy, it's possible for the pen to hit it. Whereas if the paper is really flat, there's less of a chance. And so this is kind of up to you on determining the height. The caveat here is that if you set a really high travel height, then the motors move much more slowly in the X and Y, or in the Z than the X and Y. So if I raise up 10 here, you can see how slow that is. Whereas if I go 10 in the X and Y, it's much faster. Because that's the way my printer was designed. So you kind of have to tweak these numbers yourself. That'll match your printer and your paper and your kind of conditions. And last thing we want to do is set the feed rate. What we can do is with each G1 command, and a G1 is a move command, and we specify these in absolute positions, we can tell it to move at some kind of feed rate. And so first we'll tell it to go to where it thinks home is. This is home. And now we can begin to experiment. Okay, let's move at a feed rate of 500. And we'll see that that's a bit slow. These are in absolute position, so we're always going to need to keep incrementing x by 10. If we try like 1500, that moves nicely. And you can keep experimenting this with your printer. I know that 5000 is pretty nice for me. And so we'll set that as the feed rate. And just to reiterate, it's G1, X. And you can also specify Y and Z to get your feed rate. So X, Y, and Z coordinates, but they need to be absolute. So if you move to X10, if you try and rerun the command, it won't move because it's already at X10. So you could set it back to X0 or X20 to get increments of 10. So now what we're going to do is head over to code, and we're going to get our values into our library. So the first thing you want to do is pip install the library. I've already done that, so I won't do it again. We're going to now insert these values. So first you want to import the plotter 3D, and then hard code the values as constants up at the top. The reason for this is that there's something that I'll be working on in the future where you have to hard code your values if the mins are not 0, and use those to offset later, which you'll see in a second in the code. So we'll initialize the plotter with those values that we passed in. Some other values here, we'll give it a title, and we will give it a output directory and handle out of bounds. So if there is, you can see here, we'll print warning if there are points you want to plot that don't fit within your plotting area, and it'll skip the point, or error, which will just cause the whole program to crash, and you'll need to go back and figure out why your points are not within the plotting area. I like to set it to warning and then go back later because you'll get a preview of things, of what you're going to plot. I prefer warning versus error. So next we'll initialize a layer. You can call it whatever you want. I'll call it the black pen layer, and then we'll add it to our plotter. And the last two fields, color and line width, are used in the plotter preview, so we can kind of get a rough idea on the computer of what we're plotting before we plot it. And line width is roughly the thickness of the pen. So now we can start adding values, such as adding a point, and this is what I was talking about. X min is 0, so this is actually doing nothing. But Y min is not 0, so we want to offset so that the point fits within the plotter area. And we can go through and add some other shapes. So we can add a circle, we can add rectangles, we can add paths and lines and text. And then once we have everything we want to plot, we can preview it, and then we can save it. So if we go ahead and now run our script, we'll see that we get a preview here. Starts at our min for X and Y on our plotter, and then goes up to our maxes. We can see now that we have an output folder, which has our named piece. And in here, we have 2 G-code files that we can now send off via Cura. So the first file is the preview file. And this just draws, it'll home in the X, Y, and Z, and then it'll draw a box around where the plot is going to be, just so you can do it as a kind of sanity check. So if we go ahead and print via USB, we can see first that it is zeroing out in the X and in the Y. And you can see right now it is previewing the plotting area, which looks like a good place to do things. All right, so now the Z is homed. Now we can come over here. And remember that we set the travel height to 3 millimeters. So we want to come here with our ruler and bring this down until it just hits the surface. Perfect. Do just a little bit more. Okay, so that should be good. And now we can go ahead and grab our actual black pen that we want to plot. And you can ignore these warnings and go ahead and print. So there's our dot, there's our circle, there is a rectangle, there's a path, there's just a random line. And then here we have it writing out some text. All right, so if you can see, just kind of the lines aren't the sharpest. And that's personally, I'm not the biggest fan of this marker. I find that, at least for me, I prefer kind of more like rounded tipped, kind of like this pen here, where it's not like a paintbrush. But each marker has its own place, and so that's up to you to artistically decide how you want to do things. That is more or less getting started with gcode2dplotterart and 3D printers. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the comments below. Until next time, happy making.